It is how journalism can and does make a difference. Welcome to World News Day 2022. I'm Warren Fernandez. In the recent weeks leading up to this World News Day, news organizations from around the globe have sent us examples of their work. Now, these reflect the difference that journalism can make in the lives for inspiration and renew our belief in the power and purpose of credible journalism. Now, there is an old newsroom adage that says, show, don't tell. So let me show you an example from Organización Editorial Mexican, which shows just how journalism can make a difference.
Los medios fueron cruciales. Se empieza a viralizar y se empieza a ir y a crecer este mensaje, y que yo estoy segura que llegó tanto a los políticos como a los grupos de crimen organizado como a la sociedad.
La primera vez que fuimos no había nada, era un terreno muy grande y no había nada, absolutamente nadie. Y en la segunda ocasión ya había un cerco de seguridad impresionante, ya la Marina, la Fiscalía General de la República, Policía Estatal, tenían tomado todo ese lugar.
Es una de las experiencias que más llevo conmigo, porque Martita estaba buscando con nosotros. Al principio yo pensé que era una señora que requería de mucho cuidado por la forma en la que caminaba. Acabábamos de encontrar unos restos. Cuando vi que Martita comenzó a ponerse muy triste y a decaer, la tomé del hombro y ella se me lanzó a los brazos prácticamente. Estaba atravesando una situación muy difícil porque no solamente estaba buscando a una persona, Martita busca a 7 familiares.
Los medios definitivamente es la única herramienta que nosotros tenemos para transmitir este mensaje tan importante.
And now, as I wish you a happy World News Day 2022, it is my pleasure to introduce you to my friend and comrade-in-arms behind World News Day. He is an industry leader who was the inspiration for the creation of World News Day. And he is, of course, David Wormsley, the editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail in Canada.
Thanks, Warren, and it's lovely to see you all here. It's been a long time. When I started World News Day in 2018, it was with the intention of creating a moment where journalists from all media and all over the world, many of whom spend the year in fierce competition, standing in solidarity and giving something back to our audience. As news evolves, both the stories and the distribution models, it is our audiences that let us know the stories that matter to them and what stories they need us to tell, to further the voice of our audience, but also as an industry to use World News Day as our opportunity to share our story. In the years since the first World News Day, as the democracies that we once took for granted, but which we are now in the fight of our lives for, means that the resolve to share our message has also grown. Through the year-round efforts of Natalie Turvey, Cheryl and Ireton, the Canadian Journalism Foundation, the World Editors Forum of WNIFRA, and with the support of Google News Initiative, World News Day has become a pillar around which those of us who cherish free press and fact-based journalism can rely to show we can make a difference, to amplify the voices of those not previously heard, and to support the unimpeachable tenet that facts are not negotiable. From the floor of the Washington Post to La Nación and to the Straits Times, today there are more than 500 newsrooms across our planet who are joining in the message, journalism makes a difference. Wherever you are, thank you for joining us today. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to our host for World News Day 2022. Having served in senior roles at NBC News, The New York Times, NPR, CNN, and Twitter, our host is a veteran journalist who understands what must stay the same and what must change. She is currently the executive director at Aspen Digital, an organization that empowers companies and the public to be responsible stewards of technology and media in an informed, just, and equitable world. Please welcome to World News Day, Vivian Schiller.
Thank you, David. And hello, everybody. I'm really, really thrilled to be here and even more thrilled to be part of this World News Day program as we celebrate the craft of journalism and the pursuit of the truth. Journalism has always been important, but never more so than today. But despite the changes in the way we deliver the news, the way we consume news, the way we pay for news, the way we collect revenue, support our newsrooms, there are some things that haven't changed. Powerful reporting by committed journalists who are dedicated to sharing vital information, to telling deeply reported stories, to bearing witness. And those have a powerful effect on the public's understanding and can drive real change. Journalists and the stories they tell have the power to inform and impact matters of critical public policy, public health, trust in institutions. More and more so, these are life and death matters, quite literally. There are increasing challenges, as everybody in this room knows, from those who would seek to mislead the public or disorient the public and to accuse fact-based journalists, people like us who are rooted in what I like to refer to quaintly as evidence-based reality, that we are liars, that we have our thumbs on the scale to affect outcomes, that we are not to be trusted, and we are not to be believed. Why do we scare them? Because of the impact that we have. We hold institutions and individuals to account. And those that would seek to gain more and more power don't want us telling those stories. But the pen remains mighty, as is the camera, as is the audio recorder, as is the data visualization, and the animation, and every other way that we now tell stories in order to reach people. And those continue to impart critical information to the public. We will not be cowed by those who would come after us. Today, we're going to be having some in-depth discussions with some of our industry's shining lights about some of the many challenges we face in our businesses, but also some of the opportunities that those challenges may provide. A crisis is too great an opportunity to waste. So before I welcome our first guest to the World News Day stage, we want to begin with a story. It's a practical example of the type of tangible difference that journalism can make. From Michael Slackman, Assistant Managing Editor of International at the New York Times, a story that demonstrates how fact-based journalism can bring clarity to the chaos of the world.
The world seems to be facing one crisis after another. War in Ukraine, disastrous heat waves and floodings, mass shootings, the erosion of democracy, and of course, the enduring pandemic. Our journalism, in fact, all journalism, aims to help people around the world live more informed lives, to make smart decisions for themselves, their loved ones, and their communities. Our goal is to spread knowledge and understanding, essentially to help build bridges. Journalism, after all, rewards curiosity. To do our work, we must be on the ground, to bear witness, to hold the powerful to account, to give voice to those otherwise ignored. We were there to witness Afghan city's fall to the Taliban, to cover the ruthless military coup in Myanmar, the insurrection at the US Capitol, a year of bloodshed and conflict in Ethiopia, the assassination of the Haitian president in his own bedroom. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, we had already spent months on the ground covering the simmering tensions. We're still there across the vast nation as Ukrainians fight and die for their country. Behind this work is the expertise of a team of reporters, editors, photographers, videographers, audio specialists, data experts, and researchers working together to deliver the news across all platforms. Together, they foster deep knowledge of history, culture, and context. This is the New York Times, but we are certainly not alone. Many other fine, independent news organizations around the world produce brave, groundbreaking, essential journalism that gives people the information they need to better understand their world. Journalism matters, perhaps now more than ever.
Great. So our first guest today, I'm so excited because I get to have a conversation with her, is Reuters editor-in-chief Alessandra Galloni. She is the first female editor in the organization's history, which is remarkable, and I bet you all share the same sentiment I have, which is I cannot wait for a day when that is unremarkable. But remarkable it is nonetheless. Alessandra has forged her career as a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, as an editor for Reuters' Southern Europe Bureau, and has just tremendous achievements as a journalist before even taking on the mantle of leading one of the world's most important news organizations. So please join me in welcoming to World News Day, Alessandra. We're going to sit over here. We're going to get comfortable. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. Oh.
Before I create chaos.
I know, yeah, it's okay. And we got nice swivel chairs, so this is great. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. One of the things that's fascinating to me about Reuters that is not quite, but nearly unique among global news organizations is that you not only are obviously doing your own reporting, you are a news institution, but that you are serving publishers all over the world who rely on you for coverage of events both local to them sometimes and global. And through them, you have tremendous impact. So I'm just wondering, that is such a huge responsibility at a time, as we've been discussing so far, that trust is at a deficit. So how do you think about those dual responsibilities, both of your own reporting and serving the needs of local news organizations all over the world?
Yeah, no, thank you, and it's great to be here. You have sort of hit upon what I call, and it's not a very pretty word, but our glocality, which is that, certainly we're a global news organization. We have 200 bureaus around the world, but we're also a very local news organization, as you said. So we publish in 15 languages, and we have local reporters working in their local language in many, many countries. And this brings me to the second point, which is we believe that this local expertise, this depth of knowledge of reporting in your own country, which, by the way, carries risks, which we can talk about later, provides that this expertise allows us to get to the source, to get to the truth, to get to those facts that then we can present to other news organizations, and they know that they have a foundation for their news because we have delivered it, and that therefore allows them to do their own further news gathering. So it's that essence, if you will, of providing fact-based journalism at the source that we believe. It's true that we provide news for media organizations around the world, and we estimate that we reach up to 2 billion people a day that way. But we also, half of our...
That's a big audience.
We also provide news to a financial terminal. And that's half of our business. And providing news to a financial terminal has been instructive for us in another way, added to what I said before, which is that when you provide news to people who are making or losing money on what you tell them, you better tell them the truth, because if not, they're not coming back to you. So those two things really sort of shape who we are. And then of course, we have a third leg stool of our business model, which is providing news directly to the consumer, which is part of our professional business. So it's mainly aimed, again, at people who need our news and hopefully want our news.
So with those, I mean, those are very different audiences with very different needs and interests. Of course, everything is fact-based. Let's just stipulate that what you do, you are truth tellers. But how do you balance those news priorities? I think about in every newsroom that I've, been a part of or led, we have made editorial decisions about what stories we're telling, what stories we're not telling, what we prioritize, what we want to make sure the audience hears first, that kind of thing. How do you balance that when you have your own news judgment as a experienced editor yourself, and the needs and news judgments of the clients, effectively, that you're serving?
Yeah, well, a couple of things I would say. First of all, the fact that we serve so many different clients, so many different news organizations, financial markets, and again, the direct consumer, in a sense, unshackles us from any one interest. And in fact, we have sort of a 10 commandments at Reuters. They're called the Trust Principles, and they were established in 1941 during World War II, at a time when there was a war and there was propaganda from all sides of the war.
That's sounding awfully familiar.
Yes, and those trust principles impose on us that we have to give trusted, reliable, unbiased news. And so I always say, sort of in the newsroom, that if you write an article and everyone is a little bit happy and a little bit unhappy about what you wrote, then we've probably reached that balance. And so that gets to the question you say, how do you balance the needs? We try to cover the news in a trustworthy, fact-based way. I mean, that's essentially sort of, what you're asking. But again, this plethora of clients allows us as a business to, it's been successful as a business model too.
I want to come back to that in a minute, this notion of neutrality and impartiality, which many people feel is maybe something that news organizations should rethink. We'll hold that thought, but I just want to ask you, before we get to that, one of your priorities, we've chatted a few times before this conversation on stage, was about reaching underserved audiences, which is, something, at least in the United States, we're very focused on. Whose stories really have been getting short shrift, which audiences are not seeing themselves and their experiences reflected in the news. How do you do that when you are a global organization where the notion of who is underserved, who is underrepresented, the notions of diversity are different in each locality and region that you serve?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say we are not where we need to be yet, right? Diversity is frankly tantamount to being a credible news organization. You cannot be a credible news organization if you don't look like the world that you're covering and if you don't reflect it, but also if you don't, in your coverage, get that diversity of opinion. And so we're working very hard on that. As you say, for us, it's even harder because we are local in so many countries, and diversity means different things in different countries and different languages. So what we try to do is to go as deep as possible, and also we pride ourselves in not being of any sort of nationality or any country. Now, our parent company, Thomson Reuters, is Canadian, but Reuters, we say, has no real headquarters. I mean, one could say it's sort of, I'm in London, my boss is in New York, but this idea of not identifying with any government, any country, helps us around the world when we report.
Yeah. So I said we would come back to this issue, so I'm going to come back to it now. Look, you mentioned your trust principles were formed in 1941, at a time when indeed there was a world war, when there was propaganda, flooding, the airways. But let's face it, those were newsreels in a cinema. They were newspapers. They were not blasting at us in the supercomputers that we all hold in our hands, and were not subject to the same level of instantaneous manipulation. So here we are, 2022, also I think many of us still shocked that we can't believe there's a kinetic war on European soil that's happening at a time when autocracies are on the rise, at a time when propaganda is coming fast and furious. How do you think about, and where disinformation are spread faster than we could ever have imagined. So how do you think about the notion of neutrality and impartiality in face of these kinds of assaults on journalists and journalism itself?
Yeah, so I come back to sort of the basics, right? To the basics of journalism, sort of the shoe leather reporting, right? That you learn when you first want to be a reporter. And that is, I believe that there are certain truths, I believe that there are certain facts, and I think that news organizations can find them. It's not easy amid the cacophony, as you say, but I believe that it can be found. I also believe that you need to listen to all sides. So for example, we're talking about Russia and Ukraine, and we have quite a strong contingent of reporters in both Russia and Ukraine. Some news organizations chose to leave Russia at the beginning of the war, and that is a very respectable decision. It is not easy to report right now in Russia. We decided to stay in because we believe that if suddenly there's a cloud over what the Kremlin is saying, what is said inside Russia and what is happening inside Russia, then that doesn't help. That's not a good public service for the world. But what we do is we put it through the verification system of our reporting and our editing. And that is true for our own news. And by the way, I should say we have never called it a special operation, we have called it what it is. But it's not only our own news, it is also what we call now user-generated content that increasingly, especially in conflict areas, is coming from the ground. So people holding up their phones and putting it on TikTok. Yeah. That's how, I mean, it's not the first war that we've learned a lot about what is going on the ground. And we verify it. And there's lots of systems that go back to sort of, again, basic reporting as to how we verify it before putting it out. And the same with official remarks by, let's say, government officials on all sides.
Yeah. It's interesting that you have many news organizations pulled the reporters out of Russia, both just in general for their general risk of safety, but also because of the decree from the Russian government that any reporting that is out of alignment with the official word, i.e. special operation, would risk that reporter being imprisoned. So that's, so you're journalists, I mean, I'm sure you feel this very deeply. I know when I ran when I was in charge of NPR, the thing that weighed most upon me was the safety of our reporters in hot zones everywhere. So you've got reporters in Russia, you've got reporters in difficult places all over the world, in Central America. I mean, we could spend the rest of the time talking about areas where there's at risk. How do you think about balancing that the personal safety for the reporters and your mission to serve the public by reporting from every place in the world?
Yeah. Well, first of all, no story is worth a life, categorically. And we spend a lot of time and money and care taking care of our journalists. And that is true in conflict zones, as you say, obviously in Ukraine. And it does cost a lot of money to keep people safe, which is why when people talk about business models and the need for news to be paid for, you need a lot of resources to keep reporters safe, both in the way of protecting them with equipment, everything from flak jackets to armored vehicles, and to training that happens before, during, and after. So there's a lot that goes into security. There's also the security of people in places like Russia. And that is where legal comes in, right? We spend a lot of time looking at the legal ramifications of certain laws that come in. And in fact, I mean, it's worth saying with this audience, I mean, many of you know this, the legal attacks on journalism keep increasing. And it's not just putting people in jail. And our reporters, you know, we've had various occasions where our reporters have been put in jail, most recently in Ethiopia, most famously in Myanmar, our reporters who were in jail for more than 500 days. But it's also more nefarious legal attacks on journalists. So going after journalists, not for their publishing, not for what they covered, but for tax evasion or for you know, hooliganism, you know, or things like that. So no journalism, no story is worth a life, and we dedicate much time and much care and resources on keeping our reporters safe on the ground. But our reporters equally, they believe in the public service mission that requires us to be in places. So if they can be kept safe, our reporters are the first who say they want to be there and tell the world what's going on.
Yeah. That's a huge responsibility for you. But I know often it's usually not the reporters who are reluctant to go. On the contrary, sometimes it's like, I know you want to go. We don't feel it's safe. It's difficult. So just, we're unfortunately running out of time. I wish we could keep talking for the rest of the afternoon. But I just, you know, this is World News Day. And as we've been, as all of the speakers have been referring to, the truth is under assault. You and many other people here lead major news organizations. What do news organizations need to do, other than keep on keeping on with our reporting, to try to reestablish that trust that so many bad actors, let's call them, are seeking are seeking day in and day out to undermine? What do we do to help people understand that we are truth tellers, that we are serving the interests of the public, and that we are to be trusted?
Yeah, I mean, it's the question of the day, of the week, of
I'm
the
hoping
year.
you can answer it, because I don't know the answer.
I don't have the perfect answer. But I can say that I think that if we journalists give our consumers, our viewers, our readers, news that matters to them, news that makes a difference in their lives, like during COVID, information about vaccines or information about what to do to keep yourself safe. Or, and I almost had a lump in my throat with the Mexico video, you know, or information that actually saves people's lives. So for example, the video reminded me of a little boy in Kabul who got lost in the evacuation, and a story that we did on him managed then months later to have him reunited with his family. So I think we journalists have to always think about the why. It's not just the what. What is it? What's news? Just because something is new does not mean that it's news or it's relevant. So we have to make information, we have to think about what information is relevant for the people who are consuming
it. So it's having it hit home for people personally.
For people. Yeah. And then there is everything in the trade of journalism, which I don't need to go through here, but to do it responsibly. And that runs the gamut, you know, from identifying yourself as a reporter to correcting mistakes, because I think this concept that journalists have, you know, it's not about us, right? The trade, because it's a trade of journalism, is about telling the lives of others and not putting us in the first person. So all these procedures, as I call them, like an operating room in which you do your job responsibly, that also is really important.
It's interesting because the notion of course, it's a principle of journalism. When we make a mistake, we correct it and we declare it quite loudly. Often that can be weaponized by bad actors. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Alessandra, thank you so much. You have a tremendous set of responsibilities, and I will just say, as a member of the public, that I'm grateful for the work that Reuters does all over the world, and you are part of the arsenal of truth that we are here to celebrate. So thank you so much.
Thank
really
you, Vivian.
Appreciate
the
it.
arsenal of truth.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Oops. All right. I'm going back into my MC role here. Thank you so much again. Our next clip is a tribute to the power of the camera. From grainy film footage of World War I to broadcast quality iPhone video today, cameras have captured the triumph, tragedy, and euphoria of the human condition like no other medium. So the team from Reuters, in fact, here is an unrelenting look at the impact of the Russian-Ukraine war, the economic impact, the human toll at home and around the world.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
This is a deliberate, cold-blooded and long-planned invasion.
Oh, those images will never cease to be shocking. Thank you for that. As we've been talking about over the last time together so far, the voices that seek to discredit us are louder than ever. And so we are going to continue the conversation about how we restore our credibility in the face of bad actors who are seeking to discredit us, to call us liars, or to call us enemies of the people, as one particular would-be autocrat has famously said in the United States. How do we engage young people in the issues of the day, in the importance of fact-based journalism, so that they come of age to trust us more? How do we better engage communities that are currently underserved, and perhaps have always been underserved by institutional journalism? So to discuss this, please welcome the chair of the board of the Canadian Journalism Foundation, Kathy English. Joining Kathy, please also welcome the director of Next Generation Audiences for the Washington Post, Phoebe Connolly, and the founder of Inclusive Journalism, CIMRU, Shirish Kulkarni. Welcome to you all. Thank you very much.
The mics. Thank you, Vivian. It's such a pleasure to be in Zaragoza to celebrate World News Day. I think we're preaching to the converted in this room when we say journalism matters, journalism makes a difference. But we know that not all audiences agree with us. As the Reuters Institute Digital News Report, the recent 2022 report tells us, that the connection between the journalism and the public may be fraying. So how do we begin to confront this great big problem of reaching underserved audiences? I'd like to start with Phoebe. You have this really fascinating title of Head of Next Generation Audience Development. What does that mean, and where do you begin?
So fun fact, our team didn't have a name at first, so our Slack channel is still called XYZ, because that was our placeholder name until we figured out what we were gonna call. The mandate that my team has is to help the Post as a whole figure out how we're reaching younger and more diverse audiences. We have started that mission in a couple of different ways, but I think key to that is understanding the needs of those audiences, providing the newsroom and the business as a whole with metrics so that they can understand where they stand with these audiences, if they're reaching them, if they're not reaching them, and then work across divisions to amplify the great work that's already happening, and then create space for experiments.
Okay. Shirish, you have said on the record a few times, I've seen that great big problems can't be solved in old ways, that they require great big solutions. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so essentially I have a critique of where we are now with the journalism industry. and that's about the storytelling and who's telling the stories. And I'd ask people to do, I guess we've talked about diversity and inclusion a lot, but I'd ask people to do a thought experiment. Say, you're working in Western Europe, say your newsroom was full of people of color rather than people who are white. Would your coverage of crime, education, economics be the same or different? If you think it would be the same, then I'd suggest you're deluded. If you think it's different, then that means we're doing something wrong, because the storytelling would be different, the people who'd be telling the stories are different. And so I think there are really big challenges for all of us to face there. Because as Alessandra talked about, we've got to reflect the audience. And I don't really like audience because that feels like a kind of passive thing. They're users, they're consumers. We need to start thinking of, we're making a product that is meeting the user's needs and is actually, as Alessandra said, giving them things that are valuable to them.
You both are doing work to attract underserved and young audiences. Can you talk a little bit about what the concept of audience is to you? What and who are you doing this for?
When I thought through, when I first took this job, how was I going to explain my job to the newsroom? I came back again and again to the idea of accountability and really trying to dig into the idea that we can't have true accountability if there's not an audience. Your journalism cannot be effective in holding an institution, those with power, accountable. It's accountable to whom? To your audience, right? And so I don't think, when you put it in that light, the idea of reflecting the demographics of, the geographic region that you're serving or the age ranges, that's part of the work, right? Because if you're not reaching those audiences, then we're not really accomplishing our mission.
What about you?
Yeah, and I'd say the same. I mean, there's a really simple kind of, again, another sort of simple thought experiment you can do. In the UK, the average reading age is 9, right? So if, for example, I work occasionally at the BBC, can a 9-year-old read everything on the BBC News site? No. Right, so we're instantly ruling out half our audience. That's how averages work, right? So actually we're saying we don't care about half our audience because we just want to carry on doing journalism in the way it's always been done, the way we want to do it. So actually, when we talk about kind of underserved audience, I call them badly served audiences because we're not actually doing a good job for them. I tell a story now, and it's like, imagine you worked at Procter & Gamble or Unilever, and you made soap powder, and people bought soap powder for a while, and then they stopped buying soap powder so much, and then they stopped believing in the concept of soap powder. And imagine if, in my job at marketing at Unilever, I said, actually, the soap powder is still great. They just don't understand what good soap powder is. Let's have a soap powder literacy campaign, right? I wouldn't be working at Procter & Gamble very long. So actually, we have to sometimes accept that the product we're providing isn't meeting those needs.
Okay, so that brings me to a question around why has this happened, and have you faced resistance within a big institution such as the Washington Post? Can't remember how many years it's been publishing, but many, many years, legacy, the very definition of a legacy newsroom. Do you face resistance to?
I haven't faced resistance at all. I think across the board, I've seen departments come to us, they want to reach these audiences, they want to understand the toolkit. Journalists are just by their nature endlessly curious, right? What's new? How do we figure out how to, be on the cutting edge? I think that's part of who we are. So I think the trickier thing for not just the Post, but I think all of our organizations is to make sure that we're not assuming that this work isn't happening, because it is, right? We've already hired journalists. I would challenge every newsroom to go back and find the journalists who are already doing this experimentation, right? Who are already on the social media platform that you think, oh gosh, I don't know how we're going to do that. Trust, there's someone in your newsroom who is on there, who is using it as a journalist, as a consumer of news and information, who has thoughts about your strategy. And the trickier work is how do you make sure they have a place at the table, that they're taken seriously, that they're brought into assigning conversations, they're brought into your investigative work, they're brought into deep conversations about news judgment and how you approach are your most serious stories.
And you're working across departments. This is beyond editorial. Can you tell us a little bit about how that collaboration works?
Yeah, it's been fun. I think what has opened up for us at the Post is that it has allowed us to move with speed to invite readers in at all stages. So one thing that we did this past year was reconsider the way that we greeted users who came to us from Reddit. The Post has long had a presence on Reddit. Gene Park started it. It has its own voice, but a very authentic Post voice, very much showing our work, explaining how the Post does journalism. And we felt like we were underserving that audience, right? How did we welcome them even deeper into our product? So because the Next Gen team has folks on our subscriptions team, on our product team, we set up a custom registration wall. So when you follow a link and come to the Washington Post, you get a message, you get a custom offer that if you register, you get more access than other folks do. And because of the community that Reddit is, we found that those users are younger.
So would you be working with product to create all of that?
Yeah.
So that's
So I've got a product manager on my team, and I've got someone from the subscriptions department on my team as well. So what it's allowed us to do is, instead of me alone having to kind of put together a plan, I already have a team that is embedded in all of those departments, and we're working together, and we're able to move much faster, I think, than if we were all siloed, right? And we would have to convene a meeting. We're already in a Slack room together. We're already doing a stand-up every week.
That's great. When I told someone about this panel, the comment was, oh, is that going to be about why newsrooms aren't on TikTok? Can we talk about platforms and TikTok? You've mentioned Reddit. Is this about encouraging newsrooms to embrace other platforms, integrating? Can we talk about that? And what has been some resistance to new platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I never think it's about the platform. And we talked about this. It's like, you know, people come along thinking, how do we get on TikTok, especially because Phoebe's here. But it's not about the platform, it's about the storytelling. So if you think about the storytelling that works on TikTok, it's explainers, right? It's explaining the story. And the research I've done around storytelling, people wanted more context. They wanted to understand where the story had come from and where the story was going. That actually people are less interested in breaking news than journalists are. Mm-hmm. And actually, if you get a one-line push notification, yeah, people might click on it, but they're left with a sense of anxiety. Then you get to news avoidance. And actually, we're creating the cycle which is stopping users from engaging with us. So actually, for me, it's about doing the storytelling that meets you know, the things they're telling us they want. So actually, you know, what Ros Atkins does on the BBC is explain it. It just happens to be on the biggest broadcaster in the world, but he could be doing that on TikTok. We could be doing that on TikTok. We could be doing it on Instagram. We could be doing it on the web. I mean, a big problem is, like, actually, you know, people are talking about Web 3. We're still doing newspaper stories on the web. We haven't got to grips with Web 2 yet. So actually thinking more deeply about the storytelling and not thinking, actually, we're just doing newspaper stories online is also a good start to that.
If I can add to that too, I think it's important to remember that those platforms, whether or not you choose to engage on them or publish on them, that's where your readers, your consumers are spending time. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to internalize the vocabulary of those platforms, the actions of those platforms. So a start to any strategy can just be, is your newsroom investing some time on there, right? Are you going to see the questions that are being asked by readers on those platforms? Are you seeing the story forms that they expect on those platforms? And are you bringing that back to the storytelling that you do on your owned and operated, in your own app, right? I think it can be a little too easy to say, okay, well, go launch a TikTok account. The harder question is, are you paying attention to the style of video that is appearing on TikTok, and is that coming back to the way you produce video every day? Full stop.
So, Phoebe, could you take us through a specific example? Let's say, you know, one of the biggest news stories we all experienced recently, the death of the Queen. Did you have a plan, or did you kind of ad hoc figure out how you were going to embrace that story on all platforms? Like, could you put your ideas into practice on that great big story?
I feel that would be totally out of place, because, I mean, this is how we've approached this at the Post, right? That's not my job, and that's the right way that it should work, right? Okay. I think that it's not good to set up a team, a next-gen team, or it's an Instagram team. We have a great Instagram team. We have a great TikTok team. They bring story ideas to the table every time there's breaking news, every time there's a long-running news story that we need to help our readers re-engage with or understand better. But it's important that, so we have that story coverage meeting, that they're in that meeting, that they're at the table, and that their ideas about lines of coverage or how we explain the story to our readers is part of how we program and think about our entire news budget. Where we fail is when a bunch of editors put together a news budget and then they hand it to the social team and they say, okay, can you make sure this gets on Instagram? Like that doesn't make sense, and that's not going to make sense.
Yeah.
And I think we've made huge strides on that at the Post, where that is what our news meetings look like.
That's great. I worked for legacy newsrooms for a long time, and in recent years, it was just starting to move that, so it sounds like you're making some progress. Shirish, you have done a lot of really fascinating work on reinventing storytelling. Can you tell us a little bit, and I know it's quite in-depth, but maybe a little bit about some of your 7 ways of telling stories?
Yeah, so I call it slightly kind of over the top, 7 building blocks of reflective journalism.
Reflective journalism.
But I think what it starts with is what I call, and I think Alessandra mentioned it, I call it orientation. What is the information we're giving people that helps them understand their world, helps them decide whether an event or a policy is good for them, their families, and their communities? And actually that sounds obvious, but then you look at the journalism which exists in the world, and not all of it does that. So an example I use is a couple of months ago, the top story on the BBC News website in Wales, where I live, was a road crash on the big motorway, the big highway in South Wales, and 1 person had died. And that is tragic, but actually, and that's what most people would regard as news, but actually, what value does it have to anyone else actually in the world? Even in Wales, if there'd been 5 crashes in the same point, yeah. But actually, so I think we have to move away from thinking of news as the thing that's helping people understand the world, and think about, when we're talking about journalism, it's the journalism that's helping people understand the world, that's providing them with that orientation, because that's the thing that's going to get them to engage. Because if they see their questions answered, what is it about this story that relates to my life, or what is it that relates to my family's life in India, for example? Because underserved audience or badly served audiences don't exist in one place. Actually, I did some community newsroom work recently, and they said, we'd actually really like to tell stories about India or Iran or Ethiopia, because that's where their families came from. And actually, my dad watches more Indian news than what he watches more UK news. So actually think of the people as multi-layered, and not just defined by one aspect of their personality is really important to that, because we're all very complex people. And the other thing I look at is something called modular journalism, because again, the old
what was that? I missed
modular
that.
journalism.
Modular, right. Okay.
So the old world kind of view is that one story can be everything to everyone. Yeah, that's how the BBC has worked for a long time. But actually, there's much more competition for information, right? And actually, we engage with information in very different ways. So actually, how can we provide stories which are served to different people in different ways to directly meet their needs, not our needs as journalists?
Okay, that makes sense. And you have been doing training in newsrooms around reflective journalism?
Yeah, so I speak to quite a lot of newsrooms around reflective journalism. And it's interesting, actually, because, some people find it really uncomfortable. It's very popular in Scandinavia, where they're much more open-minded. Less popular in the UK, actually, ironically, where things are a bit more conservative. But actually, in a way, it's kind of basic common sense. I don't claim any kind of expertise in this. It's actually thinking about, the way I think about it, and with the modular journalism, is what do people want to know? So actually that starts with, why is this important? So for that question about the road crash, if you ask why is this important, there's not a very good answer to that. So that's a really obvious one. But then you start asking, are there any, for example, are there any people, communities particularly affected by this story? or how did we get here? And also, something that may be uncomfortable is what happens next? Where are we going with this? What's the evidence? And then you get into kind of solutions journalism, constructive journalism, all things that users, audiences consistently tell us they want more of, but actually still struggle sometimes to get traction in newsrooms.
So the who cares and why did this matter questions just need to be asked across the board with everything we do.
100%.
Shirish, you also talk very strongly about decolonizing the news, and that's a question that newsrooms have been dealing with forever, as long as I've been a journalist. Newsrooms have been talking about we need more diversity, we need more diverse sources. You've talked a lot, again, about blowing things up. Why does that matter? And then, Phoebe, I know the Washington Post has done a lot of work in this area, so we can just talk about this matter of decolonizing the news and why does that matter?
Yeah, and it matters for that reason I asked about that thought experiment about, what if there were more people of colour, for example, or more working class people, frankly, in newsrooms. Everything would be different. And I think what I want to get across really is that there are things that we do as organisations. There's lots of really good work happening here, and I don't want to kind of play that down. But there are things that happen in organisations in every sector which feel good for the organisations, but which aren't necessarily solving the problem. So, for example, if you look at diversity internships, right? What is the problem we're trying to solve? We're trying to solve the problem of having a broader pipeline of people coming into the industry. Now, a diversity internship, I was a beneficiary of one of those, but I'd already crossed most of the barriers. And then I get a diversity internship to go to journalism school. I think if we want to really broaden the pipeline, we should be working with schools, kids, and their parents, importantly, much younger, so sort of 10, 11, 12. So if you look at just my experience, in Indian culture, journalism is a very low status career. Right. They may be right. But so actually it's a real battle for me to almost get past my parents' kind of understanding of what journalism was. So again, we can work with younger kids. But the problem is, for organisations, that's not something they can put on their end of year report. So we have to decide, do we want to solve the problem or do we want to do something which feels good for us? Yeah. And the other thing I'd say on that is don't do a diversity internship unless you're absolutely secure the organisation is a safe place for them to work in.
Very good point.
And because I've had to go in, as in my role as kind of having started Inclusive Journalism Cymru, I've had to go into big news organisations because I've heard absolute horror stories. People straight out using the N-word, and this is 2022. And so, I can't encourage people to go and work for those organisations if that's their experience. So we've got to do the really hard work. That's the problem, it's hard work.
It is hard
work.
But
it's necessary work.
Phoebe, is the Washington Post doing that hard work?
I hope so. I will say one thing that we've found in the research that we've done over the past year is that we know that younger audiences are demographically more diverse than those that are older. But we also know that regardless, they demand and expect that of the media that they consume. That is a value that they want to see in their media. So that's right there. The audience is telling us that we need to change. The work that we've done this past year really has been led by Nima Patel, who's the editor on the Next Generation team. It came up in her interview process, and she really said, I want us to do a newsroom-wide look at our sourcing and give reporters and editors tools and a framework to be able to question how we source our stories, to be able to think about it in a thoughtful way, so that we're making sure that this is part of our daily process. And again, she's much more eloquent on it than I am, but I think the more that we make this something that is part of our daily conversation, and we encourage all of our reporters to feel like it's something that they can bring up, or an editor at any level can challenge and say, I think we need to look at the sourcing of this story, the better off our journalism is going to be.
I'll just say on that as well, it's so true. And again, thinking about how do people run their morning meetings, for example. When I worked at a big broadcaster in the UK, if I brought up a story about Wales, which is a country in the UK, I'd see the wave of eye rolls going around the meeting. And we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. We don't talk so much about what I think is the really important bit, which is belonging. How can people bring all of themselves to work, feel like they can express all of themselves, feel like they can talk about all the things which are important to them, and not get that wave of eye rolls go around the meeting? Because the problem is, we haven't got to critical mass in those newsroom meetings, and we may never get to that critical mass. So the people who are in that critical mass need to sort of, think about how those spaces feel to the people on the other side of that equation.
Right. So that's the inside issue. How do you think that would impact the outside, the audience perception and the content?
I think it has to start with the content. I don't think we can go in search of audiences and ask them to read us, much less pay us, if our publications are not reflecting their lives, their communities, their concerns. And it's funny, I started out with this, thinking about this when I started this job over a year ago, and I really feel it quite firmly now, that if we're going to talk about this question of diversifying our audiences, it has to start with a hard look at what we're publishing and who appears in those stories and the way that we write about them.
And how much great big change does that require?
I mean, at the Post, I'm working with Krista Thompson on this right now to try to take a look so that we can really, have some hard numbers to see how the Post is doing, right? Let's start with data. I love data. I think, it's really helpful, right? Whether, every team I've worked on at the Post knows this, right? I'm always like, let's put a benchmark, let's put a goal. What do we think this story is gonna reach? How big do we think an audience we're gonna get on this, right? You have to set a target so that you can see if you're able to reach it, right? You do yourself no favors by just saying, well, let's try this out. Let's see if it works, right? Put some numbers, draw some lines in the sand. If you don't get there, you need to change and recalibrate.
Yeah, I think that's so true. It's got to start with the content. It's got to start with experimentation. It's got to start with research with users. But I'd also say, for the journalists in that equation, I mentor a couple of people, young journalists of colour, and a young Muslim woman in particular, who is exactly the kind of journalist that people think, we want to see more of in the UK. But she asked me a question, and a really perceptive question, and I don't have a really good answer. It was, should I be doing stories about my community, or should I be doing regular stories? And I don't have a good answer to that, because we want to see more stories from her community. But I'm best known for uncovering a massive pension scandal, and I'm allowed to be a regular journalist, right? I don't get pigeonholed in the community affairs stuff. So, for kind of editors and people here, we have to leave that as a kind of open question, and actually, the more people there are in the newsroom who can tell different stories, the better.
Yes. I'm sure there's lots of audience questions for the two of you, but just before we move to audience questions, what would success look like? 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road, how do you know your team has achieved anything? What do you want to achieve? And Suresh, you've been talking about, I met you a couple years ago talking about some of these issues. Is the needle moving?
I think we're at a turning point, for sure, because I think people are realizing that if we don't do something different, then in 5 years we won't exist. And, and that's an economic problem, but the economic problem derives from whether the product's working, right? So I think we're at an inflection point, and people are experimenting and doing different things. And like as Phoebe said, I think we need to try something different, because if what we're doing right now isn't working, it's what I always say, like, business as usual is not going to fix those big problems. Big problems require big solutions, and it's not going to be overnight. We need to start that process. We're not going to diversify the pipeline tomorrow. We're not going to fix trust tomorrow. Like we've all been in those newsroom meetings where people say, we need to rebuild trust. Can we do that tomorrow? I was like, that's not how relationships work, right? You need to show up tomorrow, next week, the year after. So I think it's that, for me, it's like not looking for quick solutions, but doing the work that's really going to fix the problem, and actually accepting that might take 10 years, 20 years, whatever. But we have to start, and that's the important thing, start the work.
I think I need to be redundant, right? I think the Washington Post needs to say, I don't really think we need a next-gen team anymore because...
We have the next gen.
No, not even that, because all of your department heads are already enacting strategies around this, because we have that cross-functional level of operational, engine that's working across the Post. I mean, I hope I put myself out of a job, right? I think that will be success. But I do think that even the fact that the Post is investing in this is saying, we're going to put a team of 10 people together. We're going to make all these different cones of the Post work together on this. That is progress.
And you mentioned data. Where does the great big data point of subscriptions and dollars fit with this?
I mean, yes, we have to have numbers. We have to sort of drive toward that. I think the thing that I really pushed for at the Post is for us to think about changing the composition of our subscribers as opposed to focusing on an absolute number. Because I think that gets tricky, right? What we need to change is we need the percentage of younger readers who are coming to us, creating an account with us, reading more than one article a week from us, and then hopefully ultimately paying us. We need their slice of the pie to get bigger. That's the thing that needs to shift.
And I know Phoebe and I agree on this as well, is that actually, when we talk about the things that are needed to reach younger audiences, actually they're not just about reaching younger audiences. If you look at the recent Reuters Institute report on reaching younger audiences, if you look through it, everything applies to all audiences. And actually, everything that I found in my research was there are universal solutions. So that's the good news. If we actually meet people's needs, that actually, younger people aren't a different species. They're just younger. People of color are not a different species. They're just a different color. They have a different kind of cultural background. But actually, we all want the same things. We all want safety and security of our families. We want to understand the world. We all want the same things. So there are universal solutions in that.
That's a really good point. I did have a question around that. Like, have we not been trying to attract young audiences for years? I can remember being on a newsroom committee about how would we make you yuppies read the paper, which I'm dating myself. But it's that sense that young people, we have to attract them. We have to find a way. But that was in an era when there wasn't all of these competing platforms. So. I think we should have about 15 minutes for audience questions. Do we have questions for Shirish and Phoebe? There we go. Do we have microphones for questions? Oh, yeah.
Want to grab this one?
Okay, I think they're going to.
Ahora sí. ¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Elena de Miguel, del periódico ABC. Me ha parecido interesantísima vuestra charla sobre cómo llegar a nuevas comunidades o a nuevas generaciones y cómo lo tenéis que gestionar con la redacción, con el resto de la redacción, la hostilidad que muchas veces os encontráis. Nosotros también estamos un poco en ese proceso y me gustaría preguntaros que en ese proceso de traducir las noticias a los jóvenes o buscar nuevos contenidos a los jóvenes, porque a nosotros nos está pasando y me gustaría saber vuestra experiencia. Nos estamos dando cuenta que muchas veces los que tenemos ya cierta edad estamos buscando cómo producir contenidos para jóvenes cuando muchas veces es cómo el contenido que le interesa a todo el mundo se lo cuento al joven. Es decir, errores que cometemos vamos a hacer esto solamente para los jóvenes, porque a los jóvenes les interesan los videojuegos, porque a los jóvenes les interesan las series, porque a los jóvenes les interesa tal tema. Pero luego nos estamos dando cuenta que donde realmente tenemos éxito con las nuevas comunidades de jóvenes es en el tema duro, en el tema político, en el tema económico, cuando consigues traducírselo a ellos. Entonces, mi pregunta básicamente es, ¿podéis contarnos algunas experiencias de errores que hayáis cometido a la hora de llegar a los jóvenes o cómo os han sorprendido ciertas experiencias para llegar a los jóvenes? Es decir, casos de éxito y de fracaso en vuestra experiencia del día a día.
I would try to translate this. Thank you very much. She's talking about your experiences and your mistakes in the moment to reach this young public. What is your experiences of mistakes? What are the obstacles when you try to reach these audiences? And what could you be done better or change? This was basically the question. Are you fine with that? Very good.
You know, I just said this to a journalist in my newsroom for the first time, but one mistake that we make, and it's the first time I've said no, was waiting until a project is finished, right? You finish the reporting, the design is all done, maybe it's at the copy desk, but it's essentially done, and then coming to my team and saying, we think this would be great for younger audiences. Can you help us get it out in front of it? That is a mistake. We have to stop doing that. And so I reached out and I said, I'm so glad you reached out. I don't think that this is a good use of my team's time. We need to come and work with you from the beginning, and we need to work with you not on a single project, because I also don't think, I think single projects fail. I think this is for younger readers fails. I think at the beginning of any story reporting target, really defining your audience. And so when you do that, you have to say, this is for this community, this age group. And then let your reporting reflect that. Let the way you structure the story reflect that. Let the terms that you explain and you don't explain reflect that. Let your publishing strategy reflect that. I think that's where we have success. But we can't wait till the end. Then I think it's wasted.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I couldn't have put it any better than that. I mean, ultimately, it's about having a strategy which actually says, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And that, like I talk around this kind of the pipeline problem, and then doing all the steps from the beginning and actually after the story goes out in terms of impact planning and stuff like that to make that work. It's too easy to kind of do a regular story in a regular way, quote unquote, and then say, oh, actually, we've got some young people in this, so was that going to work for younger audiences? So I think it's about having like a holistic strategy, I guess.
And thinking about putting in place, don't set any team up in your newsroom to be the gatekeeper. You're welcome. You're very welcome. Instead, set up teams that can offer frameworks, exercises for defining your audience, exercises for better strategy, a checklist that they should look at if they want to figure out a strategy on BeReal or TikTok or whatever is going to come next, right? And then make that widely available and let your whole newsroom experiment with it so that there's no, the gatekeeping is what has to stop, right? Some of the most interesting political journalism we're doing right now around the midterms is coming out of our TikTok team, right? Carmela on that team is interviewing Gen Z candidates live on TikTok. Great, right? That idea shouldn't come from the top. It should come from the reporters and the people who are on those platforms.
Yeah, you want 20 experiments rather than one experiment.
So as when you say that your business as usual won't solve this is really about rethinking, reorganizing the way we do everything.
Yeah, and actually that reminds, I used to talk about reimagining journalism, but actually it's about reclaiming journalism, because actually I think what we're talking about is actually getting back to, funny enough, I was talking to someone who's an executive product manager at BBC News Labs the other day, and he said he'd been back through the archive of the LA Times from the 1920s and 1930s, And they were doing lots of explainers, lots of stuff meeting that orientation goal. And I think maybe the business model got in the way, you know, that when advertising worked, when we had a monopoly on advertising, a monopoly on information, and actually now we're in a different world. So in a way, it's about reclaiming journalism. Journalism was always about that orientation stuff. So I don't talk about reimagining so much, it's just reclaiming, like doing what actually we all got into journalism for. I got into journalism because I wanted the world to be a better place. And I think that's what we all got into journalism for, and it's what the videos are all about. And it's like actually just reconnecting ourselves with that is you know, really kind of puts that purpose back into what we're doing.
Are there any other questions? Well, I'll just wrap up with one question. If I am a news executive, an editor in the audience, what's the one piece of advice you can give them to take back to the newsroom? Here's how you can attract younger, more diverse audiences. And I know it can't be that simple, but what's that bottom line thing? Is it a way of thinking about things? What would you
I can
tell
see
them?
Phoebe pointedly looking at me first. I mean, I think it's that thing we talk about, experimentation. Business as usual is not going to work. It's not working, right? So it's about experimenting. It's about working with people and communities, the people and communities you're trying to reach. And so it's thinking about journalism not in that kind of top-down way, which has, you know, been, I suppose, the tradition for the last 30 or 40 or 50 years, and thinking, actually, we're doing this together. And like lots of people in sessions I've been to have talked about collaboration and connection. Those are things. I think journalism is built on collaboration, connection, and care. It's caring for our communities, caring for our users, caring for our colleagues as well. So that's what I'd say.
It's a great bottom line.
I would say go back to your newsroom and find ways to elevate and invite to the table for your most critical conversations your audience journalists, your youngest journalists, your diverse interns that you've hired and built a program around, and invite them to those. What are your most important 3 meetings this week? Well, why don't you invite them to the table, right? And call on them and ask them their opinions and signal to your leadership and your newsroom that those are the voices you want to be hearing from, and that those are the voices they should be talking to as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Who has a seat at the table, who has a voice in the newsroom matters greatly. Okay, thank you to both of you. I think we will turn it back over to Vivian now.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. That was a great conversation. I love you. You can hang out if you want, or you can go off stage. It's, you know, you look very cozy, so it's all good. That was a great conversation, and you probably could hear my head nodding as you were talking, particularly when we think about, you know, trying to reach younger audiences like they're some exotic creatures. Just be where the younger audiences are. That's the key. So thank you all for doing such great work. So even while we've all been sitting here today in this auditorium, just in the last hour, reporters have continued to, all over the world, work sources, be out in the field, analyze data, follow up on tips, craft stories. We are unrelenting. We will always be unrelenting, no matter who tries to stop us, because what we do matters. We don't do it for us. We don't do it because we're some kind of special species. We do it because we are the conduit to the public, so the public has the information they need to participate in their societies. So if anything, the stories that we heard today just reinforce to me how much what we do matters and how resolute we need to be, because, and I don't mean to be the grim voice here, but there's a very good chance things are going to get a whole heck of a lot worse before they get better. So we need to stand strong. We have one more clip to share with you in just a moment, and then we're going to have a short break. But I have some important housekeeping. At 5 o'clock in this room, right? In this room, we're going to reconvene for the awarding of the prestigious Golden Pen Award.
This award honors individuals and organizations who have sacrificed for the cause of press freedom. It is Juan Ifra's highest honor. And we have a special guest. If you saw the bomb-sniffing dogs, it's not because we're so special, it's because the Majesty, the King of Spain, who is also honorary president of the Congress, will be joining us for the awarding of a prestigious Golden Pen. So until then, you have a nice break, but before you stand up, please let me thank our sponsors for the support of fact-based journalism that makes World Day possible. Thank you to Alessandra Goloni, Kathy English, Phoebe Connolly, Suresh Kulkarni. Thank you for your passion, your vibrant ideas that you shared with us today. Thank you to Warren Fernandez and David Walmsley. And most important, thank you to all of you for joining us. We hope you leave today maybe a little more informed, hopefully a lot more inspired. And if you're like me, more and more proud to be part of the profession that we call journalism. So we will leave with you, before we wrap, from News 24 in Cape Town, South Africa, the preview of a shocking story that may not have been told were it not for the trust that those involved had in journalists. This is a story about people who had nowhere else to turn, a story about people whose fate may otherwise have been forgotten.
It was a very peaceful place.
The people were exceptionally open and friendly.
I'm Erica Bornman. I live in Cape Town and I'm a whistleblower and one of the main protagonists of News 24's Exodus series.
My name is Delimpilo Malinga from KwaZulu-Natal. The reason I shared my story with News 24 was to support Erica, who had started speaking about her experience.
I shared my story with News 24 because firstly, they're a trusted news source and we needed the public to know what was going on there.
After those sacrifices, I really do believe that the system finds a way of bringing people to book and they're thinking, we got away with it.
To have a news organization tell our stories validated us, but also validated hundreds of other survivors who haven't told their stories. Exodus has brought healing to so many people.
Happy World News Day. Thank you. We'll see you soon.